Welcome to the Flowering Daydream Podcast, where daydreams become reality. I'm Charlene, I'm your host, and today is Halloween and the season of Samhain. What a perfect day to have an episode about messages from the other side and shifting our perspective on the dead. So, often we approach the spirit world with fear, with hesitation. And when we talk about death or dying or mediumship or talking to the other side, a majority of the world has completely lost connection with that feeling comfortable and easy, and also something that can connect you spiritually, provide healing, provide guidance, provide wisdom, and also sort of like tending to the humans who once were on the earthly plane. When you die, you don't want to be forgotten. You had dreams and joys and stories of your own, and then all of a sudden, you're not here anymore. And maybe there is a celebration of life or a ceremony or a ritual provided for you. But so often we just kind of move on. We don't realize that they can still hear you every time you think about them, every time you talk to them, every time you honor them. They feel it on an energetic level, whether they can respond to you or not, or whether you sense the response or not. It's there, it happens. And 20 years ago, I would have said, yeah, I don't believe that, because I hadn't had any of my own personal experiences yet that would change that. And I do believe that you do have to have your own personal experiences. Nobody can tell you, like I'm telling you today in the podcast, that this exists, and that this is a possibility. It's something that you really have to experience on your own. So in today's episode, I want to create a safe container for you to learn, if you don't already know how, to connect with your loved ones on the other side, and also switch the energy, really change the energy around this from being something that you're scared of, as it's perceived in all the Hollywood movies, to something you're curious about with, intentionality, of course. There is some safety stuff involved, but really being intentional with your free will is where you create that safety in that container with this work. But everyone has the ability to connect intuitively, psychically. Some of us are more natural at it. It comes easier. Some of us who do this work, in our day-to-day lives, obviously that muscle is going to be more established. So sometimes it's just easier to go to a professional and have that direct message and receive that healing and that connection that you can get from that. But I really want to empower everyone to reestablish something that, in the pre-Christian era, pre-religious era, that we just did. It was just a part of our lives. And it's only very recently that has completely shifted and completely been forgotten. And we're just not tending to that. And we're avoiding it. We're avoiding the other side. And we're all going there. We're all going to die. So regardless of what you believe in, I think it's helpful to get more comfortable with death, but also to receive the healing and wisdom and guidance that you were meant to receive by feeling empowered and comfortable with the communication of your ability to connect to the other side. So with that being said, let's demystify communicating with the other side. So it's not just for mediums and psychics. Everyone has the ability. It's a natural gift. It's an extension of love, and it transcends all the physical boundaries. Your loved ones can always hear you. Although communication might not be direct, they'll find ways to reassure you of their presence, because our spirits do live on, and those bonds of love do continue. Sometimes it's through signs, symbols, dreams, impressions of just feeling like or sense something. Depending on how developed, your intuition is, will depend on how you receive that information. You've heard people say, I smell my grandfather's cologne sometimes. That can be one sign. Sometimes it's something that you and your loved one decided you would agree on before they died. And maybe it's, I've heard people finding pennies or coins or feathers, things like that, or birds, are going to be the way that we communicate, things like that. Sometimes it's set up before someone passes. So there's those little signs and symbols. There's lots of ways that might happen. And sometimes it might be very, very direct. There's a difference between dying and staying on the earth plane, which would be considered a ghost, right? Or going wherever it is that we go. There's a sense of completion, of light and healing, of connection and love that you can sense into, versus somebody who might be maybe stuck here, but also just maybe traumatized or lost or confused, or maybe they're just not done with, maybe they need to make some amends or clear the air in some way. This is why living every day as though it's your last, and not in a morbid way, but just, living every day as though you make amends, you say what you want to say, you say you're sorry, you speak authentically and say the truth, and don't have any regrets. When we do that, that helps that process of you becoming a good, true, and well ancestor. That helps that process. And not to be scared. I mean, you're not going to get stuck here unless you want to get stuck here. I mean, it's more about, you do have free will. There is free will after you die. There's free will while you're alive. And so just thinking about that a little bit, so that there's ease, when you do transition, because we maybe don't really know when that's going to happen, but at least we are living every day in a way that feels good and true to you. So how do you do this? How do you communicate with your loved ones? I think it's really important to be very intentional with this. I think that there are lots of energies, seen and unseen, that exist in and around us. And you can label them good or bad, but that's not really how I see it. I see it more as a range of energy. And when you're being very intentional and you're working with your free will, you are directing your energetic atmosphere and your space. You're in control of your space. This really also has a lot to do with energy hygiene and how well you know your own energy. And this is why I think this isn't talked about very often, because, if you don't know all of those things, or you're not somewhat aware of those things, then this can have a gray area. So you want to be aware of your energy, and you want to be very, very intentional about what you're doing. I like to, set a space by saying a prayer or a blessing or something of that nature, and really saying, like, this is who I'm talking to, the good, true, and beautiful part of so-and-so. And that's it. I'm not talking to anything else, and having that direct intention and having a little ritual or a process around it is really helpful. And then recognizing how you receive energetic information. Do you receive it through, your inner sight, your inner knowing, your inner hearing, your inner feeling, through that energetic smell, that, like we were talking about with the cologne? How do you receive information? So learning more about yourself, this is such a healing thing in general, because it causes you to explore more about yourself and to learn more about yourself in this intuitive way. And just not really doubting whatever you do receive, when you're doing this. There's other times where I don't set a container and do anything. I'm just thinking of my loved one, or I'm sending a prayer or a blessing to them, or I'm asking for wisdom or healing. So it doesn't always have to be a big ritual or anything like that. But you're shifting the energy when you're being very intentional, sometimes through meditation or through breath work. you can put yourself in more of a state of relaxed, so that you're out of this like brainwave state where you are mentally very active and you're shifting into that state that you are in before you almost fall asleep. Sometimes it's easier to do it, by doing some preparation work like that. For me, it happens without doing any of those things. And so sometimes that can be a little bit shocking, but I've gotten used to it. In the beginning, I had to get support for that and just really learn about why that was directly happening. And once I learned to control my energy a little bit more, I was able to dial it back and have more control over it. So yeah, you might be turning it up, you might be turning it down, you're kind of adjusting it based on that. And then how that mediumship, you can call it, comes through, how we're communicating with the other side can come through in a number of different ways. And for me, it comes through channeling, which I will work with my higher self or my lead guide, and I will have that communication come through them. Also, it comes through mental mediumship, which is just having it come through all those direct channels of my intuition. There's also physical mediumship and trance mediumship where, there's something being taken over in the body. And although I've learned one of those practices in my lineage of how to do that, I don't prefer that. I don't like that. It's not my thing. So I am fine with the channeling and the mental mediumship, but there are lots of ways that people can receive this information. And then interpreting the information or understanding the information. A lot of times it'll just be a feeling, no matter how it comes through, of connection with your loved one. And that will be enough to create that healing or that connection. Sometimes you'll need to develop your interpretation skills, your spiritual interpretation skills. I really do think that this whole realm is not about facts. It's not about, well, science is kind of catching up to some of these things, but it's not about science. It's not about facts. It's not about hard evidence or black and white. It's about the mystery. It's about symbolism. It's about a subtle ability to connect with this energy that you maybe don't see. You don't see love. That's not something you see, but you feel it. It exists. You don't see sound waves, but we know they exist. There's a lot of things that we don't see. That doesn't mean they don't exist or they're not affecting you. If you've walked into a space or you're somewhere and you just get the chills or your hair stands or you get a feeling, you're sensing into the energy around you. And I want to encourage the first thing to not be to go into fear or to not panic. The first thing that I would recommend in that situation is just simply checking your energetic space, your free will, your intentionality, and going, I don't feel like feeling this right now, so I don't want to feel this. No thanks. Or it's sort of like, what is this? What am I sensing? Am I sensing into the land, into the history, into the people that used to live here? Am I sensing, what am I sensing? And this type of work, if you go into this professionally, is so needed in terms of helping the other side too. And just being curious about, what happened and if there's something that you can do. Now, that's not for everyone. And you definitely do want the skills and you do want the training, in there in some way to be able to do it in that way. You don't want to just go into that, walk into a cemetery and just handle this in the raw without any knowledge. But I think it pertains more to like if you've bought a home and you sense something in the home, things like that. It's good to be educated and aware of, hey, maybe I can call in some support, some spiritual support. Maybe I can call in who and what I pray to or talk to my allies or to my deities or to my gods or whatever. Hey, can you, clear this house and help out whoever is in here or whatever is in here? I can send something here. You can also just like ask for support. It doesn't have to be you that's, primarily doing that. I'm kind of teetering back and forth between talking to you about how to connect with your loved ones and then also just mediumship in general. But I think they're very connected. So I think it's necessary we talk about both. So why does it work sometimes? Why does it not work sometimes? I don't have those answers. Who knows what spirits are off doing, or what actually happens after we die. Sometimes I feel very connected to my loved ones. Sometimes I can't feel anything. So it's not also this like expectation of something mandatorily happening every time you go to connect, and not getting discouraged, from that. I remember when my grandma died, we were very, very close. She did a lot of raising me, and I didn't connect with her for 3 years, and I had the skills and ability to do so. And I was devastated. I was like, where the heck is she? I know time is not, the same thing on the other side as it is over here either. And then one day she just showed up in the middle of a facial while I was at work. And I was in such shock. I'm thinking to myself in my mind, I'm like, can you come back later? Like, I'm working. And she said something really funny, as she always does, as though no time had passed. And I was just in shock. I was like, this is so bizarre. It's not the way that I assumed it would happen. It's not the format I assumed it would happen. A lot of times with clients and connecting with loved ones, they're expecting them to communicate as though they did when they were here. And it's just not the same. Whatever they communicate to us is sort of what they need to communicate. It really isn't about the living anymore. It's about, whatever they need to get informs in terms of that communication from us, so that they can be at peace or whatever the thing is. Sometimes I get more than that, but a lot of times it's not about that. It's just, you just have to allow the experience to happen without expectation, without anything being mandatory, and just kind of see what happens. It's more about being curious and aware and sensing into that, and just having the experience rather than trying to control the experience outside of your intentionality and, your safety and ethics around it. So there's that. So how do you connect? How do you connect on your own? What are the ways that you can do that? So as I said before, set an intention, be very intentional. I just want to speak to so-and-so. I don't want to speak to anyone else. You can allow yourself to go into that space through meditation or breath work, where you're calm, where you're quieting your mind, and where you're just kind of being open to the experience. And you can pull out some oracle or tarot cards. This is one of my favorite ways to communicate, although it's not, direct mediumship. It's coming in through the cards. The person will select, whatever the card is in the deck that is the closest to what they're trying to say. And so sometimes when that radio channel, or whatever you want to call it, isn't completely flowing, the cards can be really helpful to just ask a question or say something, or just even say, hey, what kind of guidance or wisdom do you have for me? Or what do you want to communicate to me? And you just pull a card or two or three, and you'll feel that sensation. It's an incredible feeling of being able to connect with them through the cards. So if you have your own oracle deck or your own tarot deck, you can do that. Again, being very intentional that you are just speaking to that one person. You can also set up like a request in your dream state when you go to sleep at night. Hey, I would love a visitation from my loved one in a good, true, and beautiful way. And any wisdom or healing or connection, I would love to experience that. I did that as well with my grandmother when she passed, and I didn't get that for a very long time. And it didn't always come on the night that I asked, so it's sort of like you need to let go of your attachment to time around this and just sort of be in the flow. So you can do it through the dream work. You can do it through the oracle cards. You can also just sort of pay attention to the signs and symbols around you. I mean, for me, I can look at everything throughout my day and connect it to a message, a sign or a symbol. Although there's some days where I'm like, not everything has a meaning, so I don't have to be super connected to that. Again, you're in the flow. You're sort of just going in and out of that flow state instead of an expectation state or something that you think is mandatory. And sometimes you'll just suddenly know or have a strong feeling or a strong sense. That's another way that we might communicate with them. So just make sure that you have good boundaries with this, whether it's through prayers or just setting intentions. Just have really good boundaries with this. And when you're finished with your communication or your experience, you want to sort of seal that energy off. It's kind of like this time of year is like a portal of the worlds colliding or thinning, or the veil is thinning, or whatever people say. It's like that. You're opening this energetic space, and you want to close the energetic space when you're finished as well. So it might be gratitude, it might be a blessing that you send, it might be just, you're you, I'm me, we're done. Like, thank you for this experience, whatever it was. So just making sure that you kind of open and then close that space. So you're not just sort of walking around with that space constantly open. Okay, so those are some ways that we can communicate. You can also work with a pendulum, although a pendulum only delivers yes, no answers. So it's a little bit less communicative than, say, an oracle card or a dream state visitation, things like that. The other way that I love doing this is with an altar, so everybody's different in terms of their practices and how they do things, but I like to set up my ancestral altar around this time every year. I do specific rituals, and I have it up for about a month, the whole month of November. And I do offerings, and I light candles, and I go over and say prayers, and I make it a month of specific guidance, healing, and connection via the altar. Now, some people keep an ancestor altar up year round, especially if they've recently lost a loved one, and that's okay too. But the altar is essentially another energetic space where it heightens your connection to that healing, to that guidance, to that wisdom. And again, I'm being very intentional about the altar. I'm not putting pictures or symbols of anyone who's alive still on the altar, because this is about honoring the dead. I am not putting anyone on the altar that I think is still unwell or might possibly be a ghost. You're thinking about those boundaries and those intentions with that space, because it's opening an energetic space for you to connect and heal and receive wisdom. Now, let's say you don't want to talk to any of your ancestors, and that's not, they're terrible or whatever. I have some of that too. Well, then you go way back and you go, okay, I know I've got 50,000 ancestors in there. I may not know who they are specifically, but I know I have some healthy and well ones. So those are the ones that I'm honoring. Those are the ones that I'm asking to come forward and help heal the other ancestors. Those are the ones that I'm asking to come forward and provide guidance and wisdom to me. So it's very customized and personalized to the individual, but the altar is another place where you might have a heightened sense of communication with your loved one. So that's why I love doing that, but also for other reasons. So those are some ways that we can connect with our loved ones on the other side. So let's do a card reading, a collective card reading from the ancestors. This is a collective reading, means for everyone. We're talking to healthy and well ancestors only. And I'm using this Halloween deck, the Enchanted Bruja Oracle, which I am obsessed with for this time of year. And this is just messages for everyone that you can take or leave. It's up to you. It's usually very helpful when we do collective readings. So we have the wand, the pumpkin, and the phantasma. So we have refinement, protection, and past. So the collective message here is healing from the traumas of the past. Everybody has past trauma in their lineage that needs healing. And the people that are alive now are the ones that can provide that. And like a domino effect, it goes backwards or forwards, however you look at energy, and is very helpful. So maybe you don't know exactly what to do with that or where to start. But again, your intention, your prayers, your blessings, those things are very, very helpful. And really just thinking about how you might be affected by patterns, behaviors, curses, whatever from the past that you're not even maybe consciously aware of that's affecting you today. Like if you've ever looked at all the studies on epigenetics, and I can't remember where this came out. I think I've talked about it on the podcast before, but where they had the rat study, where they put the cherry blossoms in the container with the mice or whatever, and they electrocuted them, and then they had babies, whatever. And then later on, the babies who were never electrocuted were put into the container with the cherry blossoms or the flowers or whatever it was. And they immediately acted as though they were electrocuted, even though they weren't. So, that's evidence that we know that pain and trauma is passed on through your genetics, through your DNA, through your bloodline. And we might be experiencing things that we're completely unaware of from our lineage that need healing or need addressing. Now, no pressure. It's not mandatory that you address all of these things, but I do think it would create a sense of healing and connection and so much more by simply just starting to acknowledge this and just seeking ways in which you might be able to address these things. There is a lot of free resources online. One of my favorite resources is Daniel Foor, Foor. He has the book Ancestral Medicine. I just got another book, Remembering Your Roots, I think is the title of it. There's podcast episodes, there's classes, there's so many things out there that are starting to really address this connection. At the same time, I think, and again, I'm jumping back and forth between the communicating with the other side and the ancestors here, but one of the ways that we can connect with our lineage, and this is one of the ways that I tried a long time ago when I was seeking this, is to look at making food, from your lineage, reconnect to the food. That is such a great avenue to start channeling that energy and that connection. And the funny part is like, I started making some things from my ancestors and it was all like bland and full of flour and potato and whatever. I didn't like any of it. And I didn't feel that connection right away. And I was laughing because it's like, oh, it was always cold and dark and there was limited resources. So this is like the food that they were making. I have a lot of Icelandic and Norwegian and Swedish background. Anyway, I was like, I don't like any of this, but it got me into that state, into that energetic state of thinking about how my past might be affecting me and how the past is unconsciously connecting to me. So there's lots of ways that we can do that refinement. Then we have the pumpkin, which is the protection card, and really thinking about how all of the unwell ancestors and loved ones who have died, who maybe didn't have resolve or amending in their life, who maybe had unfinished regrets, things like that, maybe were alcoholics or addicts or whatever the situation was that caused them to do things that weren't healthy or helpful. We do want to intentionally protect from that. And it's not a fearful thing. It's just I'm going to pray or I'm going to provide blessings or I'm going to ask the healthy ancestors to help you. It's more about just being aware that you're asking them to step back, and you're asking your healthy and well ancestors to step forward. So it's creating that space for healing. And that can go so much more deeper than that. But that's kind of, the beginning. So there's that. Then we also have Phantasma, which is the past. So this is a message of healing the past. And sorry, that's my dog barking. I think my son's coming home from school. I am recording this with no editing, just on Zoom, no intro music, no nothing. When I started this podcast, I was trying to figure out Audacity and like how to be a podcast editor. And, I was trying to do it in the professional way. And I've just gotten to the point now where it's like, that not all of that's needed. I just want to give you the direct information. You guys seem to like it. It's being received. And it takes a lot of effort and a lot of work and time and energy and money to be able to do it, on that level. And I'm just not there right now. So this is how we're doing it. So you're probably going to hear the dog bark again here in just a second. Another way, so that's our collective reading, refinement, protection, and the past. So it's really about that healing, being very intentional about who and what you're connecting to, and then healing the past, really thinking about how you can be a good ancestor, how you can die in a good way, and how that transition can be, smooth and with grace, and also how you can receive this healing and this wisdom and connection from your healthy and well loved ones on the other side. Another way, I don't want to forget about mentioning this, is through automatic writing that you can connect with your loved ones. So you can write a message with your dominant hand and then ask them to respond with your non-dominant hand. Now, this isn't for everyone. It's not going to flow super easy for some. And for others, you'll get, immediate flow. It takes you out of that like mental state and puts you in that flow state. So that's another way that we can communicate with our loved ones. I want to talk a little bit about a personal story. I have several, but I think that from those personal stories that we share, we can learn a lot, and we can maybe connect through our stories. And those experiences are what has constantly reassured to me, constantly brought that reassurance forward that our loved ones are not gone. They're not gone. And that's really helpful when you're in that place where you think they are, where you're so lost in them being gone. And yeah, they might be gone physically, but they're not gone spiritually or energetically. So the story that I want to share is about my uncle. He was amazing, and he had a laugh that filled the room, and that was very loud. And he was also very good at telling stories. And he just always had a really positive outlook on life. He had a really high vibration. His hugs were super strong. And, I always felt like he was a protector for me. And so I really, really love him. And there were a lot of experiences that we went through after he died that showed us that he was right there. I'm not going to share the super personal ones, but this one was pretty obvious. We were over at my aunt's house. We were playing some games and talking about my uncle. And she had her phone sitting on the ledge outside where we were sitting. And as we were talking about him, her phone immediately started playing the video from his memorial. We went to Mexico and we put his ashes in the ocean, which is what he wanted. And that video of his memorial started playing. And it was like instantly, I could feel, I'm like, oh my gosh. Hi, Uncle Sam. It was like, we're all playing games and he was there, and he wanted us to know that he was there. And that was one of the ways that it happened. And I remember us all just feeling that connection and that joy from that. So not always are you going to have an obvious thing like that, though. Like I said, it was 3 years before I had communication with my grandmother. But sometimes you get that direct communication. And I could talk about, why that happened versus, I think, and this is my opinion, but I think the more subtle communications happens when they have crossed over or gone to that final destination. I think the communication is subtle. I think that's because they're not still on the earthly plane, and they're not able to sort of control the physical environment with their energy or receive energy from their physical environment. And I think that my uncle was still on the earth plane when that happened. So he was able to manipulate the phone. I don't think that happens when they've completely, gone to their final destination. So that's my opinion. But it was just really wonderful to have that reassurance and to have that healing and to have that connection, to know that, he was right there with us. So that's my story. So love lives beyond death. Live fully. Know that your loved ones want you to be happy and want you to be at peace, and that the bonds of love that you've shared with them will be there for an eternity. And don't worry if you don't receive a sign. That doesn't mean your loved one isn't with you. Sometimes it's really subtle, or it takes time to notice. Don't be scared or in fear. Just have really good boundaries and be very intentional. And, don't let your intellect question whether or not something was real. Often when I've had these experiences that were kind of extreme, later on, as the experience fades, the mental intellect will try to talk you out of it, try to make sense of it, because that's what we do as humans. But when you don't have a brain and you're just consciousness, you're not going to do that, right? You're not going to do that in your spiritual form. So don't try to talk yourself out of it. Don't look for validation from others. Sometimes sharing the experience isn't the best option, especially with who you choose to share it with. Sometimes that needs to just be held close to your heart, somewhere where you can treasure it. So yeah, think about that as you move through this. And everybody's journey is a personal journey. And we can have an episode on cosmology and belief systems and sort of, what happens after you die, or what you think happens after you die. I think that would be a really fun episode to talk about. But for today, just know that your loved ones hear you, that they feel you, that they are not gone, and that you can receive guidance and healing and connection from them, and also from your healthy and well ancestors. And I want to wish everyone a happy Halloween and a happy Samhain. And I also wanted to mention the Teal Pumpkin Project at foodallergy.org. If you haven't checked it out, you can register your house for trick-or-treating on their website as a house that has options other than candy for kids who have food allergies. And I also want to just, it's a big shout out to my inner child every year, but I also have kids, so this is close to my heart, is to really encourage and celebrate the big kids who are still trick-or-treating, and knowing that they're connecting to the magic of that inner child still and holding their childhood close. I think that's really important, and that should be honored. So, celebrate those big kids that are still out there trick-or-treating. This is the Flowering Daydream Podcast. I'm Charlene. I'm your host, where daydreams become reality. Thank you so much for listening. Happy Halloween.